A lot of the people that I grew up with lived through World War II. So they had already put up with enough drama in their lives, and it was very difficult on them. Very difficult. Okay, we're just kind of running around, just sort of working on this and doing that. So computers are a wonderful thing, but with computers and with phones, we've sort of lost that ability to communicate with one another in a good way. And the sitting on the porch in the afternoons, the discussing politics, and not just biting each other's heads off, those were some good times. And as a child, I remember those things. And my grandfather on my mother's side, sitting on the porch on a Sunday afternoon, smoking his pipe. And everybody back then had a front porch, just like everybody during Christmas had a picture window where you could drive and see their Christmas trees in the picture window. So it was a different era, although it was a turbulent era. The 60s were a turbulent era. And the death of John Kennedy, the death of Martin Luther King, the death of Bobby Kennedy, those type of things, very tragic and very worrisome times that we had. And technology has brought about entertainment. It's brought about things, and I know people say, well, I would like to live in the good old days. And I think it doesn't mean that they hate the world today. I think they just would like a little peace. It's hard to find the serenity and the peace that a lot of people back then did have. But let's not be foolish either. There were issues back then. Civil rights was not peaceful back then. It was not. And I remember the day the day Kennedy died. I remember the day Martin Luther King was shot. We got word of that. When Bobby Kennedy was leaving after a speech, Sirhan, Martin Luther King. Now, I don't know if they say James Earl Ray did it. I don't know if that was real, or it's a scapegoat for someone else. I just don't know. Mr. King was not well liked during that time by the government. So there are so many conspiracies that are just wild. But it was a different era and a different time. Okay, and over here we have this here. I'm going to cut in between those legs just a little bit more. And the joy, I wish I would have known how to whittle back then, because it would have been even more relaxing to sit and do that. One of the things that whittling has brought to my life is the peacefulness that I don't think my life could have had without carving. Now, I believe that peacefulness comes from the Lord Jesus Christ, but I'm talking about just unwinding, being peaceful, concentrating on something while you do things, as you create, taking your mind, as we say, off things. I used to carve at work, and a lot of people didn't understand that, but when I was on graveyards at night, to stay awake and stuff, I used to sit there and whittle and carve and do figures, and definitely different eras, different times, but also different things that went on. Kind of look at both. What you do basically is go to the back here and look at both shoulders, and you work it like that, in other words. So many people worry about everything being so perfect. And when you go to carve or you go to whittle, perfection is a good thing if you're competing or you're trying to, maybe win an award or whatever, because that's the way the judges. But if you just carve and whittle to have fun, then you don't worry about those things. You don't worry about them. You just you have a good time, because the peace is so important. I wish my son had, and I think my son wished he could have learned more about whittling too, because he has a very stressful job in the federal prisons. And he says, sometimes, Dad, it just really stresses him out. And I'm sure working with prisoners, I'm sure it does stress him out. And I told him a long time ago how, and I remember that where I worked, there was a lot of stressful times and danger, and this was just, okay. As you go along, like I said, you just kind of look at your piece, and there's a little bit, I can see here there's a little bit too much on this side that needs to be taken off. There you go. Now, this time we're going to go ahead and put a hat on him. So I'm going to go ahead and come across here to the back side. And we're going to kind of cut around a little bit and come up under. Okay? This is the way I do it. Cut around, come up under. Cut around, you hear that kind of hammering in the background? That's somebody putting on a roof. You can always tell when people are putting a roof on. It's the way they hammer. You can hear the actually you can hear the sound of the hammer hitting shingles. And it makes a specific sound. If you really listen to it, it's a specific sound that it makes. And you can tell that he's actually hitting shingles on the roof. I don't know why it makes that particular sound, but people that know what I'm talking about. And we just sort of work up underneath there. A lot of people talk about their childhood and the things that they did when they were young, and they look back and a lot of those things. But we all realize we have to move on. And we often think about those good times because they were good times. But that life has changed so much. Problem back then is if we would have had something like COVID, we would have had a pandemic, we wouldn't have known it because, I mean, we wouldn't have known it that bad because the news, you know, wasn't 24 hours a day, and 24-hour news media just basically changed the world because of the way I mean, it's in your face. The minute something happens, it's in your face. Recently, the school shootings in Nashville and the church shootings, I mean, within just hours, they're reporting this thing. Whereas when I was a young man, it would have been weeks or days or many, many days before we would have even known about such things. But now they know within a short period of time. So 24-hour news programs have been a big factor in what goes on. And I just go around as I make the brim. Unfortunately, like everything else, carving, whittling is becoming a lost art, or has basically become a lost art. Now, I know people say, well, people are joining and stuff, but let's not fool ourselves. I mean, it's not the choice of young people today to take, I mean, it's not their choice to be a carver or a whittler. They, you know, so we have a lot of young people that want to do it, but can it keep it going? That's the key. Can the world keep it, can, you know, these young people keep it going? That's hard when you have young families and stuff like that. It's maybe as they get older, there's a lot of people that start whittling or carving when they get into their 60s or 70s when they retire, because they don't have or a lot of them, I started it as a young person. I talk to a lot of people. I get a lot of messages from people all over the world on a lot of my message boards, and there's a lot of people that want to learn, and on my Let's Talk Carving site, they want to learn, but they're so busy with other things, and oftentimes they don't always end up carrying something along. But and there's a guy with, I don't know, just turning his motorcycle around, so I guess we're gonna hear that. I don't know what that was all about. I guess he forgot something, he went back. Something I never drove was a motorcycle. I've heard people just tell about how wonderful it is, and it probably is. My father wouldn't allow us to have motorcycles. Father was very strict in the sense that motorcycles, he had a very good friend that was killed on a motorcycle. And he doesn't drive it anymore. I mean, he never would let us have one. And I didn't really have a desire to have one. My brother did. And my dad said, well, when you get old enough to afford a motorcycle and you know, get out of the house, well, you can have one. And then he got out of the house and he got married, had a family, and then so he didn't really have a motorcycle. Now, what that right there, those little motorcycles like that are what we used to call crotch rockets. They're very loud and people, they're kind of a small version of a motorcycle. A lot of people that own motorcycles don't consider these crotch rockets. They don't consider them really what you call motorcycles, the way that some of these guys have. And used to, I think a lot of it has to do with expense too. Used to, a motorcycle, you get a decent motorcycle for around $5,000, you know, and now it's $30,000 and $40,000 for one. So a lot of people. I saw the other day that this guy was driving around one of these little old three-wheeler vehicles. Had the big wheel in the back and the two smaller wheels in the front, and they have one of them that's designed like Batman's car and all that other stuff, and we call those boy toys. Those are basically for people who just have money to burn, and you know, money to spend on things. And they're like dune buggies. Basically, they're based on the form of a dune buggy. I remember the first dune buggy I ever saw in my life was when I was a young man. Well, not a young man. I was a young teen, and it was a very most of the people back then made their dune buggies. They made their own dune buggies, and they were just basically framed with a motor on them. Very not pretty. Most of them were unsophisticated, like go-karts were back then. These fancy new go-karts they got today. All right, we're working on our little hat. These fancy go-karts they got today, I mean, they are fancy. They got all the bells and whistles on them. But back then, a go-kart was just most of them had lawnmower motors on them. And little Briggs and Stratton motors is what they were. And you couldn't drive them on the street. You had to, you know, if they caught you, the police caught you on the street with them. Well, you know, now they got all kind of special little things. I see young kids driving golf carts around. And that's another thing. Golf carts, they're popular now, very popular. And when I was a young man, nobody drove a golf cart but someone who played golf. And most people couldn't afford to buy a cart. You went to the golf course and bought a cart, just a golf cart, and you would play that. And golf carts were never driven around the roads. They wouldn't have allowed that, in other words. So, different, totally different. And a kid, now you see them drive around golf carts. When I was young, bicycles were the coming thing. Not coming thing, it was the thing. Kids went to schools in bicycles, and they still do. I'm not saying they don't. Oops, they got. Oh, did I hit the? Sorry if I hit it, but I didn't knock it off, did I? No, I'm sorry. I was just trying to look and see because my hat hit the. But bicycles were the things. Draw here for the nose. But back then, we did not have the traffic that we have today. So naturally, it wasn't, it wasn't a factor, even DUIs. I mean, I know men who drank and did things like that, but they just didn't get caught that much because we didn't have the traffic that you have today. It's totally different time. Most of you know I live in a smaller town on the Gulf Coast, about 80 miles east of Houston.